You know, there's something God whispers to your body before he ever speaks to your mind. Listen to me carefully. Have you ever walked into a room, stood next to someone you've known for years, maybe even someone you love, and felt your energy just drain away like water through your fingers? I'm talking about that inexplicable heaviness that settles on your chest. That sudden exhaustion that makes no medical sense. You were fine 5 minutes ago, vibrant and full of life, and now you can barely keep your eyes open. Your shoulders sag. Your spirit feels like it's being compressed. And you tell yourself you're just tired. You tell yourself you didn't sleep well. You tell yourself it's stress from work or the weather changing, or maybe you're coming down with something. But deep in your spirit, in that place where truth lives before words can dress it up or dress it down, you know something else is happening. God is speaking, not with words, not with thunder from heaven, but with the language your body understands, with the vocabulary of your nervous system, with the grammar of your spirit. And what he's saying is this: pay attention. Something is wrong here. This connection is toxic. This relationship is costing you more than you can afford to pay. I need you to understand something right now, before we go any further. This isn't superstition. This isn't me telling you to become paranoid about everyone around you. This is about learning to read the signs that your Creator built into your very design. You see, God doesn't just speak through burning bushes and prophetic dreams. He speaks through the wisdom of your body, through the intelligence of your emotions, through that inner alarm system that starts ringing when danger is near, even when that danger wears a familiar face and calls you by name. I've spent decades studying human purpose, studying how God designed us to function, studying the patterns of healthy relationships and toxic ones. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that your body never lies. Your mind can be deceived. Your heart can be manipulated. Your emotions can be played like a violin by someone who knows exactly which strings to pull. But your body, that physical temple that houses your spirit, it tells you the truth every single time. The problem is we've stopped listening. We've been trained to ignore it. We've been conditioned to override what we feel in favor of what we think we should feel. Let me take you back to a moment in my own life that changed everything I understood about relationships and energy and divine warning systems. I was younger then, building my ministry, passionate about changing the world, full of fire and vision. There was a man, I'll call him Marcus, though that wasn't his real name. Marcus came into my life during a season when I needed help. He was talented, articulate, shared my vision, or so it seemed. On paper, he was the perfect addition to the team. He said all the right things. He knew all the right scriptures. He could pray prayers that would make angels weep. But every single time I met with Marcus, something strange happened. I would go into the meeting energized, ready to plan, ready to build, ready to create. 2 hours later, I would walk out feeling like I'd run a marathon through mud. My wife noticed it first. She said, "What's wrong? You look exhausted." And I couldn't explain it. The meetings weren't even particularly difficult. We weren't arguing. We were just talking, planning, discussing the minimum. But I would come home and need to sleep for hours. I would wake up the next morning still feeling drained. And here's the thing that should have alarmed me immediately. I started dreading our meetings. Not because of any concrete reason I could point to, but because some part of me knew what was coming. That feeling. That draining sensation, that heaviness. Now my mind tried to rationalize it. I told myself I was working too hard. I told myself I needed to exercise more, eat better, take vitamins. I created elaborate explanations for why I felt this way. Because the alternative, admitting that this person I had welcomed into my inner circle was somehow draining the very life from me, that seemed too bizarre, too spiritual, too weird to acknowledge. It took 6 months before I finally paid attention to what God was showing me through my body's response. 6 months of progressive exhaustion. 6 months of that warning system ringing louder and louder until I couldn't ignore it anymore. And when I finally did the difficult work of examining that relationship closely, when I finally looked past the words to the patterns, past the promises to the actions, past the appearance to the reality, I discovered something that shook me. Marcus wasn't who he claimed to be. The support he offered came with invisible strings attached. The encouragement he gave was laced with subtle manipulation. The partnership he proposed was actually a slow takeover disguised as collaboration. He was one of those people who feed on other people's energy, who derive their sense of power from diminishing others, who build themselves up by slowly tearing others down in ways so subtle you can't quite name what's happening. But my body knew. My body was screaming the truth while my mind was still trying to be polite, to be understanding, to be Christian, to give the benefit of the doubt. My spirit was sending up flares while my theology was telling me to be more patient, more forgiving, more accommodating. When I finally created distance from that relationship, the change was immediate and undeniable. Within days, my energy returned. That heaviness lifted. The dread disappeared. It was like someone had removed a weight from my chest that I'd become so accustomed to carrying. I'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe freely. And that's when I began to really study this phenomenon. That's when I started paying attention to the patterns. That's when I realized that God, in His infinite wisdom, has given us a built-in warning system more sophisticated than any security alarm ever invented. But we have to learn how to read it. We have to give ourselves permission to trust it. We have to stop apologizing for what our body is telling us about the people in our lives. Now let me be very clear about something crucial. This isn't about judging people. This isn't about deciding who's good or bad, worthy or unworthy. Every person on this planet is made in God's image and has inherent worth and dignity. But that doesn't mean every person belongs in your inner circle. That doesn't mean everyone deserves access to your energy, your time, your heart, your vision, your peace. You see, there's a difference between loving people and letting them drain you. There's a difference between being compassionate and being a feeding station for emotional vampires. There's a difference between healthy relationships that sometimes require effort and toxic connections that consistently leave you depleted. God is not asking you to be a doormat. He's not asking you to sacrifice your well-being on the altar of other people's dysfunction. He's not asking you to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. In fact, He's doing the exact opposite. He's trying to protect you. He's trying to guide you. He's trying to show you who belongs in your life and who doesn't, who supports your purpose and who sabotages it, who adds to your capacity and who drains it. Think about Jesus for a moment. Jesus, the ultimate expression of love and compassion. Even Jesus withdrew from crowds. Even Jesus limited who had access to Him. Even Jesus recognized that some people would take and never give back, would demand and never be satisfied, would drain and never be filled. He loved everyone, but He didn't allow everyone into His inner circle. He had the 12. He had the 3. He had the 1. Levels of access based on levels of trust, maturity, and alignment. If Jesus, who was God in flesh, set boundaries around His time and energy, what makes you think you don't need to? If Jesus, who could speak worlds into existence, recognized the importance of protecting His peace, why do you feel guilty about doing the same? Here's what I've learned. That drained feeling you get around certain people is not your weakness. It's not your problem to fix. It's not evidence that you're not spiritual enough or strong enough or mature enough. It's divine intelligence. It's spiritual discernment operating through your physical body. It's God's way of saying, this isn't right. This isn't healthy. This isn't what I designed relationship to feel like. Healthy relationships energize you, even when they're challenging. Even when you're working through conflict, even when you're having difficult conversations, healthy relationships leave you feeling more yourself, not less. They expand your capacity. They don't shrink it. They add to your life force. They don't subtract from it. But toxic relationships with people who are operating from unhealed wounds, from hidden agendas, from deep insecurity, from manipulative patterns, those relationships will drain you every single time. And it doesn't matter how much you pray about it. It doesn't matter how much you try to fix it. It doesn't matter how spiritual you are. The drain will continue until you recognize what God is showing you and take action to protect yourself. Now I want to go deeper into this because I know some of you are sitting there thinking about specific people in your life right now. You're thinking about your mother or your sister or your best friend from college or your coworker or maybe even your spouse. And you're feeling that familiar heaviness just thinking about them. That's not condemnation. That's information. That's your body giving you data. And data is neutral. It's what you do with the data that matters. Let me share something with you that changed my entire understanding of relationships. I discovered that there are different types of energy drains, and understanding which type you're dealing with helps you know how to respond. First, there are the unconscious drainers. These are people who don't even realize what they're doing. They're so consumed by their own pain, their own problems, their own unprocessed trauma, that they've become like black holes. Everything gets pulled toward their crisis. Every conversation becomes about their drama. Every interaction requires you to show up as counselor, savior, parent, or therapist. They're not trying to hurt you. They're just drowning, and drowning people will pull down anyone who comes close enough. They need help, but you're not qualified to be their rescue. And trying to be will do. Then there are the intentional drainers. These are more dangerous because there's awareness behind their actions. These are the manipulators, the controllers, the narcissists, the people who have learned that they can feel powerful by making others feel weak. They study you to find your vulnerabilities. They learn what makes you feel guilty so they can weaponize that guilt. They discover what you value so they can threaten to withdraw it. They figure out what you fear so they can keep you afraid. These people drain you strategically, systematically, and without remorse. And then there are the misaligned drainers. These are actually good people, but they're on a different path than you. They have a different calling, a different purpose, a different frequency. It's like trying to run software designed for Mac on a PC. Nothing's wrong with either system, they're just not compatible. You can love these people from a distance, but up close, the misalignment creates friction, and friction creates heat, and heat creates exhaustion. Understanding which type you're dealing with helps you know what to do. With unconscious drainers, you can set loving boundaries while encouraging them to get professional help. With intentional drainers, you need to create distance and protect yourself, sometimes permanently. With misaligned drainers, you can honor the season you had together while releasing the expectation of forced connection. But here's the key. In all three cases, your body will tell you the truth long before your mind accepts it. That drained feeling is the alarm. Don't ignore the alarm. I want you to understand the science behind what's happening, because some of you need the logical explanation alongside the spiritual one. When you're around certain people, your nervous system responds. If that person carries anxiety, your nervous system picks it up and mirrors it. If they carry aggression, even suppressed aggression, your body goes into defense mode. If they carry manipulation, your subconscious detects the incongruence between their words and their energy, and that creates stress in your system. Your body is constantly scanning the environment for safety. It's called neuroception, this process that happens below conscious awareness where your nervous system is asking, am I safe right now? When you're around healthy people, people who are genuine, people who operate with integrity, people who have good intentions toward you, your nervous system says, we're safe, we can relax, we can be open, we can be ourselves. And that actually creates energy. Connection with safe people is energizing. But when you're around unsafe people, even if they're smiling at you, even if they're saying kind words, even if they appear friendly, your nervous system detects the threat. Maybe it's in their tone. Maybe it's in their micro expressions. Maybe it's in the energy they carry. But your body knows. And when your body perceives threat, it activates stress responses. And stress responses consume massive amounts of energy. That's why you feel drained. Your body is working overtime to protect you from a threat your mind hasn't consciously identified yet. You're running internal security protocols that burn through your reserves like a furnace consuming coal in winter. And here's what most people miss. This isn't weakness. This is your nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do. When your ancestors encountered danger in the wilderness, their bodies didn't wait for conscious analysis. The moment something felt off, cortisol flooded their system, muscles tensed, digestion stopped, and every available redirected towards survival. That mechanism saved lives. But we're no longer running from predators. We're sitting in office chairs, scrolling through phones, attending family dinners. Yet our bodies can't distinguish between a lion in the grass and a passive-aggressive comment from someone we trusted. The threat detection system activates the same way. Your body mobilizes for battle when there's nothing physical to fight. So you carry this tension in your shoulders. You clench your jaw without realizing it. Your stomach tightens before certain phone calls. You develop headaches that appear without medical explanation. These aren't random symptoms, they're the physical translation of unspoken psychological realities. And let me tell you something that will shift your entire perspective. The people who hurt you don't carry this weight. They sleep peacefully while you lie awake replaying conversations. They've moved on while you're still trying to make sense of what happened. This asymmetry isn't fair, but it's instructive. It tells you that healing isn't about waiting for them to acknowledge what they did. It's about you recognizing that your body is holding a story your mind hasn't fully processed. Somewhere in your system there's unfinished business, an unexpressed scream, a boundary that was violated but never defended, a truth you witnessed but were told to ignore. Your subconscious keeps the score. It remembers the birthday they forgot, the promise they broke, the time they chose someone else's comfort over your dignity. It catalogs every moment your conscious mind tried to excuse or minimize, and it communicates through the only language it has: sensation, emotion, and physical response. This is why you can't think your way out of toxic relationships. You can understand every psychological principle, read every self-help book, and still feel that knot in your stomach when their name appears on your phone. Because the body holds wisdom the intellect hasn't caught up to yet. Your nervous system is more honest than your hopes. It's the part of you that tenses up before your mind admits something's wrong. The part that loses sleep while your heart still makes excuses. The part that stops feeling hungry, that can't focus, that jumps at notifications, your body staging an intervention your mind refuses to attend. I've watched people ignore these signals for years. And you know what happens? The body turns up the volume. What started as subtle unease becomes chronic anxiety. That occasional stomach pain becomes IBS. That tension becomes migraine. That restlessness becomes insomnia. Your body will not be silenced indefinitely. This is the compassion of your biology. It loves you too much to let you destroy yourself in peace. And here's what most relationship advice completely misses. You cannot heal what you won't feel. You cannot process what you keep explaining away. The mind is brilliant at rationalization, but the body demands truth. This is why people break down in therapy. Not because the therapist said something revolutionary, but because they finally allowed their body to speak. Tears they've been holding for months. Rage they've been calling frustration. Fear they've been rebranding as commitment. The body doesn't lie. It can't. It doesn't know how to spin narratives or protect egos or maintain images. It just responds to reality. When you're unsafe, it mobilizes. When you're trapped, it screams. When you're betrayed, it remembers even when you choose to forget. This is why leaving isn't just a mental decision. You don't just decide to go, your whole system has to reorganize. Your nervous system has to recalibrate what safety feels like. Your body has to learn that being alone isn't abandonment, it's liberation. Your heart has to discover that peace isn't boring. It's proof you're finally home. And this process takes time. Time the mind resents but the body requires. You can't rush regulation. You can't think your way into feeling safe. You have to practice it repeatedly until your nervous system believes you're serious about choosing yourself. And here's the paradox. Nobody tells you about nervous system healing. The more consistent you become, the more your old patterns will fight back. I call this the extinction burst. It's a term from behavioral psychology, but it perfectly describes what happens when you start choosing regulation over reactivity. Your nervous system, in a last-ditch effort to keep you in familiar territory, will throw everything it's got at you. The anxiety will get louder. The triggers will feel more intense. The urge to fall back into people-pleasing, overworking, or numbing out will feel almost irresistible. And most people quit right here. They think, see, this healing stuff doesn't work. I'm getting worse, not better. But you're not getting worse. You're just meeting the parts of yourself that are terrified of change. Even when that change is good for you. Especially when that change is good for you. Your nervous system has been keeping you alive with these patterns for years, maybe decades. And now you're telling it, hey, we don't need to do this anymore. It's going to test you. It's going to see if you really mean it. This is where your commitment gets tested. This is where you find out if you're serious about regulation or if you're just dabbling in self-improvement. Because true nervous system healing isn't a weekend workshop. It's not a 30-day challenge. It's a fundamental reorganization of how you move through the world. And reorganization is messy. It's uncomfortable. It requires you to stay present with sensations you've been running from your entire life. Let me give you something practical for when you hit this point. When the extinction burst comes, when everything feels harder instead of easier, I want you to acknowledge it. Say it out loud. My nervous system is fighting to keep me safe in the old way. This is actually a sign that I'm changing. Then, and this is crucial, do the regulation practice anyway. Not to make the discomfort go away, but to prove to your nervous system that you can hold yourself through it. Because here's what most people don't understand about emotional regulation. It's not about controlling your emotions. It's not about suppressing what you feel or pretending everything is fine when it's not. That's not regulation. That's repression. And repression always comes back to bite you. Real emotional regulation is about expanding your capacity to feel without being consumed by what you feel. It's about creating space between the emotion and your reaction to it. It's about saying, I feel angry right now, and I can notice that anger without immediately lashing. Or I feel anxious, and I can sit with this anxiety without needing to frantically fix it or run away from it. Think of it like this. Imagine you're standing in the ocean. When you're dysregulated, every wave that comes knocks you completely over. You're tumbling underwater, disoriented, gasping for air. You have no stability. Every emotion feels like it could drown you. But when you develop regulation skills, you learn to plant your feet. The waves still come. The water still moves. But you've built the internal strength to stay standing. You feel the force of the wave. You acknowledge it. But you don't get swept away by it. That's what we're building here. Not a life without waves. Not a life without difficult emotions. But a life where you have the capacity to feel everything and still remain grounded in who you are. And let me tell you something that might surprise you. The goal isn't to always be calm. That's another myth we need to destroy. Sometimes anger is the appropriate response. Sometimes anxiety is giving you important information. Sometimes sadness needs to be felt deeply and completely. The goal is to be able to choose your response. To have access to your full range of emotions without any single emotion hijacking your entire system. To be able to feel rage without becoming violent. To feel fear without becoming paralyzed. To feel joy without becoming reckless. This is emotional maturity, and it's available to you. No matter what happened in your childhood, no matter how dysregulated you've been up until this point, your nervous system can learn. It can adapt. It can be trained to hold peace instead of panic, to rest instead of run, to connect instead of collapse. But here's what most people don't understand. Regulation isn't something you achieve once and you're done. It's not a destination. It's a practice. It's a daily choice. A moment-by-moment decision to bring your body back into alignment with truth. You see, every single day, life is going to give you opportunities to dysregulate. Someone's going to cut you off in traffic. Your boss is going to send that email. Your spouse is going to say something that triggers an old wound. Your child is going to push your buttons. The bill is going to be higher than you expected. These are not obstacles to regulation. These are invitations to practice it. This is where most people fail. They think regulation means the absence of stress. They think it means nothing ever bothers them. They think it means living in some kind of bubble where life doesn't touch them. No, that's not regulation. That's isolation. That's denial. That's numbness. Regulation means you feel the stress. You acknowledge the trigger. You notice the activation in your body. And then you consciously, deliberately, intentionally guide yourself back to center. You don't avoid the wave. You learn to surf it. And I want to tell you something powerful. Every time you do this, every time you feel your heart rate spike and you choose to breathe slowly, every time you feel your chest tighten and you choose to soften, every time you feel the urge to lash out and you choose to pause, you are literally rewiring your brain. Neuroplasticity, that's the scientific term. Your brain is forming new pathways, new highways of response, new patterns of being. You are becoming a new person, not by denying who you were, but by upgrading the operating system. And here's the beautiful part. The more you practice, the easier it gets. The neural pathways become stronger. The responses become more automatic. What once required tremendous effort becomes second nature. You start to notice that things that used to send you into a tailspin for 3 days now only shake you for 3 minutes, then 3 seconds, then not at all. This is growth. This is transformation. This is what it means to renew your mind. And here's what most people miss. Renewal is not a passive activity. You don't renew your mind by sitting still and hoping inspiration falls from heaven. No. Renewal requires engagement. It requires you to actively participate in the transformation of your thinking. Think about physical exercise for a moment. You don't develop muscles by reading about weightlifting. You don't build endurance by watching videos of people running marathons. You have to actually lift the weights. You have to put on those shoes and hit the pavement. Your body transforms through action, through resistance, through the consistent application of effort. Your mind works the same way. When you encounter a thought pattern that doesn't serve you, that voice that says I'm not qualified, or I always mess things up, or people like me don't succeed, you can't just acknowledge it and move on. You have to confront it, challenge it, replace it with truth. This is where most people get exhausted. They think I've been thinking this way for 30 years, 40 years, my whole life. How can I possibly change now? And I want to tell you something that might shock you. Your brain doesn't care how long you had a bad habit. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, doesn't have an expiration date. Scientists have proven that you can form new neural pathways at any age. Your brain is designed for transformation. But here's the catch. New pathways require repetition. You can't think one positive thought and expect your entire mental landscape to shift. That's like going to the gym once and expecting a six-pack. Transformation happens through consistent, deliberate practice. I remember working with a young man who struggled with an identity shaped entirely by his failures. Every conversation he would reference his past mistakes, his business that failed, his relationships that ended, his dreams that died. His mind had become a museum of disappointments. One day I asked him, how many hours a day do you spend rehearsing your failures? He looked at me puzzled. What do you mean? I said, you just spent 20 minutes telling me everything that went wrong. How much time do you spend thinking about what could go right? He had no answer. That's the power of mental rehearsal. We become experts at whatever we practice. If you practice failure, you'll perfect it. If you practice defeat, you'll master it. But if you practice possibility, if you rehearse success, if you train your mind to see opportunity instead of obstacle, you will transform. And this transformation doesn't happen in some mystical, distant future. It happens in the mundane moments. It happens when you're sitting in traffic and you choose to listen to something that educates you instead of something that drains you. It happens when you're scrolling through your phone and you decide to read something that elevates your thinking instead of something that numbs your mind. It happens in the small choices, the daily disciplines, the micro decisions that nobody sees but everybody will eventually experience the results of. You see, most people are waiting for some dramatic moment to change their lives. They're waiting for the perfect opportunity, the ideal circumstances, the right connections. But I want to tell you something that might shake you. Transformation is not an event, it's a process. It's not a moment, it's a movement. And that movement begins with the simple decision to stop rehearsing your limitations and start practicing your possibilities. I remember working with a young man who had every excuse in the book. No education, no connections, no capital. Came from the wrong side of town, wrong family background, wrong everything according to society's scorecard. But he had something that money can't buy. He had a made-up mind. He decided that his current address was not his final destination. And you know what he did? Every single day he would spend 30 minutes reading about business. Every single day he would practice speaking with confidence in front of a mirror. Every single day he would write down 5 things he was grateful for and 5 actions he would take to move closer to his vision. People thought he was crazy. His own family mocked him, but he wasn't performing for an audience. He was rehearsing for his future. And within 5 years, that young man built a business that employed over 50 people in his community. The same community that laughed at him was now benefiting from his transformation. That's the power of practice. That's what happens when you stop letting your history write your destiny and start letting your vision pull you forward. You've got to understand your past is a place of reference, not a place of residence. You can learn from it, but you cannot live in it. You see, so many people are dragging the weight of yesterday into the potential of tomorrow. They're trying to build a new house with old broken bricks. They're trying to plant a garden in soil contaminated by bitterness and regret. And then they wonder why nothing grows. They wonder why their future looks so much like their past. Let me tell you something that will set you free. You are not the sum of what happened to you. You are the sum of what you decide to do with what happened to you. That's the difference between a victim and a victor. A victim says, "Look what they did to me." A victor says, "Look what I did with what they did to me." I've watched people transform their greatest pain into their most powerful purpose. The woman who was abused becomes the voice for those who can't speak. The man who lost everything becomes the one who teaches others how to build wealth with wisdom. The child who grew up in dysfunction becomes the parent who breaks the cycle. That's not denial. That's redemption. That's taking the rubble of your past and building a monument to possibility. Now here's what I need you to grasp. Your pain has prepared you for something. Your struggle has qualified you for an assignment. There are people who need what only you can give them because you've walked through what they're walking through. But if you stay stuck in your story, you'll never step into your purpose. If you keep rehearsing the hurt, you'll never get to the healing that's waiting on the other side. I'm not saying forget. I'm saying forgive. I'm not saying it didn't matter. I'm saying don't let it be the only thing that matters. Because when you hold on to what hurt you, you give it permission to keep hurting you. You become its prisoner. And the tragedy is not just what they did to you back then, it's what you're doing to yourself right now by refusing to let it go. Here's the truth that'll make you uncomfortable before it makes you free. Nobody's coming to give you closure. Nobody's coming to apologize the way you need them to. Nobody's coming to validate your pain or rewrite your history. And you can spend the rest of your life waiting for that moment, or you can give yourself permission to move forward anyway. Because freedom is not about what happened to you. Freedom is about who you choose to become in spite of what happened to you. It's about understanding that the power to move forward has always been yours, even when you didn't know how to access it. Think about a prisoner held captive for years. When the door finally opens, when someone says you're free to go, many prisoners hesitate. Some refuse to leave because captivity has become familiar. The chains have become comfortable. And freedom, real freedom, is terrifying because it demands responsibility. You can't blame the cell anymore for where you are. You can't blame the walls for what you didn't become. You have to face the open door and decide, am I going to walk through it, or am I going to stay here, because staying here means I never have to risk failing in freedom. That's the real battle. Not the battle with whoever hurt you. The battle with yourself. The battle between the version of you that wants to stay safe in familiar pain and the version of you that's ready to step into uncertain healing. And here's what I need you to understand. Healing doesn't mean you're going to forget what happened. It doesn't mean the memory disappears. It doesn't mean you wake up one day and it's like it never occurred. That's not what healing is. Healing is when you can remember what happened without reliving the emotions. Healing is when the memory becomes a fact instead of a feeling. Healing is when you can say, yes, that happened to me, and it was wrong and it hurt, but it doesn't define my present or determine my future. You see, unforgiveness keeps the past alive. It keeps feeding it. It keeps giving it oxygen. Every time you rehearse the offense, every time you replay the conversation, every time you imagine confronting them, you're bringing the past into your present and making it your future. But forgiveness starves the past. It stops feeding it. It stops giving it your energy, your peace, your possibilities. Forgiveness doesn't say what you did was okay. Forgiveness says what you did was wrong, but I'm not going to let it be wrong twice by allowing it to ruin my life too. Because here's what I've learned. Unforgiveness is the most expensive mortgage you'll ever carry. You're making payments on a house that burned down years ago. You're sending checks every month for damage someone else caused. And the person who hurt you, they've moved on. They're not losing sleep. They're not bound up in knots. You are. I remember counseling a woman who had been betrayed by her business partner 15 years earlier. 15 years. And she told me, with tears streaming down her face, I think about what she did to me every single day. I asked her, do you think she thinks about you every day? She paused. Probably not. I said, then who's really in prison here? See, your offender has moved on with their life. They're pursuing their dreams, building relationships, experiencing joy. Meanwhile, you're stuck in a cell, rehearsing the trial over and over, examining the evidence, reliving the verdict. They gave you the wound once, but you're the one who keeps reopening it. This is what unforgiveness does. It convinces you that by holding on, you're holding them accountable. But accountability and bitterness are not the same thing. You can acknowledge what happened without carrying it. You can remember without reliving. You can learn without being sentenced to life imprisonment in the memory. And here's the truth that will set you free. Forgiveness is not about them. It never was. Forgiveness is about you reclaiming your future. It's about you deciding that your tomorrow is more important than your yesterday. It's about you choosing to live again. When you forgive, you're not saying the debt doesn't exist. You're saying you're no longer going to be the bill collector. You're transferring that account to God. You're saying, I'm not qualified to be judge and jury. I'm going to let the righteous judge handle this. And when you do that, something miraculous happens. The weight lifts. The chains fall. The future opens up. Because you can't drive forward while staring in the rearview mirror. You'll crash. You'll miss the turns. You'll bypass your destination. Your future is in front of you, not behind you. But unforgiveness keeps you locked in reverse. I've watched marriages dissolve not because love died, but because someone refused to release an offense from 10 years ago. I've seen businesses crumble because a partner couldn't forgive a mistake made in year one. I've counseled people who are physically sick, ulcers, headaches, high blood pressure, all because they're carrying the weight of unforgiveness in their emotional backpack. Here's what many people don't understand. Forgiveness isn't about the other person. Let me say that again. Forgiveness is not about them. It's about you. When you forgive, you're not saying what they did was okay. You're not excusing it. You're not minimizing it. You're simply saying, I refuse to let this moment define the rest of my life. Forgiveness is the key that unlocks the prison. And then you realize you were the guard all along. You've been keeping yourself locked up. The person who hurt you, they moved on. They're sleeping peacefully at night. They're not thinking about you. But you're up at 3 in the morning rehearsing conversations that will never happen, planning revenges that will never satisfy you. I want you to think about someone right now. Someone who hurt you. Someone whose name makes your jaw clench. Now I want you to realize something profound. Every minute you spend thinking about what they did to you is a minute they're still controlling you. They don't even need to be in the room. They could be in another city, another country. They could be dead. And they're still controlling your emotions, your decisions, your destiny. That's not power. That's slavery. And the slave master isn't them. It's your own unwillingness to let go. I'm not saying forgiveness is easy. Don't mishear me. Some of you have been through deep trauma, real betrayal, genuine abuse. I'm not trivializing your pain, but I am asking you this question. How much longer are you going to let what happened then determine what happens now? How much of your future are you willing to sacrifice on the altar of your past? You cannot drive forward while staring in the rearview mirror. Eventually you're going to crash. And when you do, the person you're angry at won't feel the impact. You will. That's why forgiveness isn't optional if you want to lead effectively. It's essential. Because unforgiveness doesn't just affect your emotions, it affects your decisions. When you're operating from a place of bitterness, you can't see clearly. You start making choices based on who hurt you, not on what's best for your future. You avoid opportunities because they remind you of your pain. You reject relationships because they feel too risky. You stay stuck in patterns that no longer serve you, simply because moving forward would mean letting go of the story you've been telling yourself about how you were wronged. And here's the part that hurts the most. Unforgiveness makes you become like the very person who hurt you. Think about that. The person you resent for being selfish, controlling, or dishonest. You start exhibiting those same traits because you're so consumed with protecting yourself from being hurt again. You build walls. You manipulate situations to maintain control. You withhold trust, affection, truth. And before you know it, you're doing to others exactly what was done to you. The cycle continues. The wound becomes a weapon, and the victim becomes the victimizer. I've seen this happen to gifted leaders. I've watched people with incredible potential sabotage their own destiny because they refuse to forgive. They couldn't celebrate others' success because someone once stole their spotlight. They couldn't delegate because someone once betrayed their trust. They couldn't receive love because someone once abandoned them. And year after year they wondered why they kept hitting the same ceiling, facing the same obstacles, attracting the same type of toxic relationships. The answer was always the same: unforgiveness. It was the invisible prison they built around themselves, thinking they were protecting their heart, when really they were suffocating their future. So how do you break free? How do you actually forgive when the wound is deep and the betrayal is real? First, you have to understand what forgiveness is not. Forgiveness is not saying what happened was okay. It's not pretending you weren't hurt. It's not reconciling with someone who's still toxic. It's not forgetting the lesson. And it's definitely not waiting until you feel like forgiving. Forgiveness is a decision. It's a choice you make for your own freedom, regardless of whether the other person deserves it, acknowledges it, or even knows about it. Let me tell you something that revolutionized my understanding of forgiveness. I discovered that unforgiveness is the only prison where the inmate is also the warden. You're locking yourself up and then complaining about being confined. Think about that. The person who hurt you is living their life, possibly completely unaware of your pain, while you're sitting in a cell of bitterness, holding the key but refusing to use it. I remember counseling a woman whose husband had betrayed her decades earlier. They'd since divorced, he'd remarried, and by all accounts had moved on. But she was still consumed by what he'd done. Every conversation somehow circled back to his betrayal. Every relationship she attempted was sabotaged by her unresolved anger. And when I gently suggested she needed to forgive, she looked at me with fire in her eyes and said, "Why should I let him off the hook?" And that's when I had to explain something crucial. Forgiveness isn't letting them off the hook. It's recognizing that you were never meant to be the hook. That's not your job. Your job isn't to punish, to exact revenge, or to make sure they suffer enough. Your job is to release what's weighing you down so you can fulfill your purpose. See, here's what unforgiveness does. It turns you into something you were never designed to be. It transforms you into a walking monument to your pain. Your entire identity becomes wrapped up in what was done to you. You introduce yourself by your wounds. You make decisions based on your scars. And slowly, imperceptibly, the hurt that was inflicted on you becomes the hurt you inflict on everyone else. I've watched people carry grudges for so long that they forgot what they were originally angry about. They just knew they were supposed to be mad at so-and-so. It became a habit, a pattern, a comfortable dysfunction. And the tragedy is that while they were busy preserving their right to be angry, they were sacrificing their right to be happy. You see, there's something powerful that happens when you realize that forgiveness isn't about them at all. It's about you. It's about your freedom. It's about your future. When you hold on to unforgiveness, you're essentially saying, "I'm going to let what they did yesterday control what I can become tomorrow." You're giving them power over your destiny, without them even being present in your life anymore. I've watched people carry grudges against folks who didn't even remember the offense. I've seen individuals poisoned by bitterness toward people who had already moved on, gotten married, had children, built successful lives, while the one holding the grudge was stuck in a time capsule of pain, reliving the same hurt over and over again. That's not justice. That's self-imposed imprisonment. Here's what's fascinating. Unforgiveness doesn't preserve the evidence of the crime. It doesn't keep the record straight. What it does is distort your perception of everything else. When you look at life through the lens of unforgiveness, Everything becomes filtered through that pain. New relationships are viewed with suspicion. Opportunities are dismissed because you're afraid of being hurt again. Your potential becomes handcuffed to your past. Let me tell you something that might revolutionize your thinking. The person who hurt you doesn't have to apologize for you to be free. They don't have to acknowledge what they did. They don't have to feel remorse. They don't even have to be alive. Your freedom is not dependent on their repentance. This is critical to understand, because many people are waiting for an apology that's never going to come, and in that waiting they're wasting their lives. Forgiveness is a unilateral decision. It's something you do independently of the other person's response or awareness. You're not saying what they did was okay. You're not excusing the behavior. You're not pretending it didn't hurt. You're simply saying, I refuse to let this continue to drain my life force. I refuse to give this any more of my emotional energy. I release this, and in releasing it, I release myself. Think about it like this. Imagine you're in a relay race, and someone passes you a baton that's on fire. That baton represents the offense, the hurt, the betrayal. Now you have two choices. You can hold on to that burning baton, letting it sear your hands, damaging your ability to run, all while screaming about how wrong it was for someone to hand you a flaming baton. Or you can drop it, let it go, and continue running your race. Yes, you might have some burns. Yes, it was wrong that it happened. But holding on to it doesn't punish the person who gave it to you. It only continues to burn you. Let me tell you something powerful. There are people living in mansions who are prisoners of their past. And there are people in small apartments who wake up every morning with freedom in their hearts. The difference? One group forgave. The other group is still waiting for an apology that will never come. I've watched men lose their families because they couldn't let go of what their father did. I've seen women sabotage every relationship because they're still angry at their first heartbreak. I've counseled successful people who achieved everything the world calls success, but they still feel empty inside because they're carrying conversations from 20 years ago. Listen carefully. Your past is not your prison unless you choose to live there. The key to your cell is in your hand. It's called forgiveness. And the moment you turn that key, you'll discover something remarkable. The door was never locked from the outside. You are holding it shut from the inside. Now I need to address something else. Some of you watching this have built your entire identity around what happened to you. You introduce yourself by your wounds. I'm the person whose parents divorced. I'm the one who was betrayed. I'm the victim of that situation. And I want to say this with all the love in my heart. You are so much more than what happened to you. Your pain does not define you. Your past does not own you. That chapter of your story does not get to write the rest of your book. You are the author now. Pick up the pen, start writing the next chapter, and let that chapter be about who you're becoming, not who hurt you. Here's what I've learned over decades of ministry. Forgiveness doesn't wait until you feel like it. You don't wake up one morning with a sudden desire to forgive. No, forgiveness is a decision you make despite your feelings. You decide to forgive and then your emotions eventually catch up with your decision. It's like exercising. You don't wait until you feel like going to the gym. If you did that, you'd never go. You go to the gym and after a while your body starts to crave it. The same principle applies to forgiveness. You make the choice, you declare it. You act on it and eventually your heart aligns with your decision. And here's what's beautiful: when you exercise the discipline of forgiveness consistently, something supernatural begins to happen. Your capacity to forgive expands. What once felt impossible becomes manageable. What once took you months to release, you can now release in weeks, then days, then hours. You're building spiritual muscle. I've seen people who started their forgiveness journey struggling to release minor offenses. They'd hold grudges over small slights, petty disagreements, forgotten appointments. But as they practiced forgiveness, as they made it a habit, a lifestyle, they developed this incredible strength. Years later, I watched these same individuals forgive catastrophic betrayals with a grace that defied human logic. They had trained themselves in the art of release. This is what maturity looks like. But let me address something crucial here, because I don't want you to misunderstand what I'm saying. When I talk about forgiving quickly, I'm not suggesting you bypass the genuine pain. I'm not asking you to pretend you weren't hurt. I'm not promoting some superficial just get over it mentality that dismisses your legitimate wounds. Real forgiveness acknowledges the depth of the offense. It says, yes, this happened. Yes, it was wrong. Yes, it hurt me deeply. You don't minimize what was done to you. You don't gaslight yourself into believing it wasn't that bad. You face the full reality of the betrayal, the abandonment, the abuse, the injustice. You call it what it is. And then, and this is the key, you make a conscious choice not to let that offense define your future. You refuse to give the person who hurt you continued access to your peace, your joy, your destiny. You look at what they did. You feel what you feel. And then you say, I'm not carrying this anymore. I'm not building my identity around this wound. I'm not letting this moment become my monument. That's the difference between denial and forgiveness. Denial says it didn't hurt. Forgiveness says it hurt, but I'm releasing it anyway. Denial pretends the offense never happened. Forgiveness acknowledges it fully and chooses freedom despite it. Think about it this way. When Jesus was on the cross, he didn't say, Father, this isn't really painful, or Father, they didn't mean it that way. No, he experienced the full brutality of human cruelty. He felt every spike, every thorn, every moment of abandonment. And from that place of full awareness, he declared, Father, forgive them. This wasn't forgiveness from a position of ignorance. This wasn't a naive statement from someone who didn't understand what was happening. This was the most radical act of forgiveness in human history, spoken by someone who knew exactly what was being done to him and chose forgiveness anyway. Let me show you something that will challenge everything you think about forgiveness. When Jesus said forgive them, he wasn't just forgiving the soldiers. He wasn't just forgiving the religious leaders. He wasn't just forgiving Pilate or Herod. He was forgiving humanity. He was forgiving you. He was forgiving me. He was forgiving every sin that had ever been committed and every sin that would ever be committed. That's the scope of divine forgiveness. It doesn't just cover what you know. It covers what you don't know. It doesn't just address the offense you're aware of. It addresses the entire debt of humanity. Now watch this. Most of us want to forgive like accountants. We want to calculate the exact amount of the offense, measure our forgiveness precisely against that amount, and call it even. We want proportional forgiveness. You hurt me this much, so I'll forgive you this much. But divine forgiveness doesn't work like that. Divine forgiveness is extravagant. It's excessive. It's over the top. It forgives more than was asked. It releases more than was owed. It covers more than was damaged. Peter thought he was being generous when he asked Jesus, should I forgive 7 times? In Peter's mind, 7 was abundance. 7 was more than enough. 7 was going above and beyond what any reasonable person would require. And Jesus looked at him and said, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. Now Jesus wasn't giving Peter a mathematical formula to track forgiveness. He wasn't saying keep count until you reach 490, then you're done. He was saying something far more radical. Stop counting. Forgiveness that counts isn't forgiveness at all. It's just delayed revenge with a calculator. Because when you keep count, you're still holding the power over that person. You're still positioning yourself as judge and executioner. You're saying, I'll forgive you 3 times, but on the 4th you're finished. That's not grace. That's probation. Real forgiveness doesn't have a scoreboard. It doesn't have a limit. It doesn't have a cutoff date. And here's why this is so important. Because you don't need a limit on something you've truly released. Think about it. If you truly let go of an offense, why would you need to count how many times you've done it? The only reason you count is because you're still holding on. You're keeping a record. You're building a case. And one day when that person crosses your invisible line, you pull out your list and say, see, I forgave you 12 times. But this is number 13. Now I'm done. But Jesus is saying the kingdom doesn't operate like that. In God's economy, forgiveness is infinite because love is infinite. And the moment you put a limit on forgiveness, you've stopped operating in love and started operating in law. Now, let me be clear. Forgiveness doesn't mean stupidity. It doesn't mean you keep putting yourself in harm's way. It doesn't mean you ignore patterns of abuse or manipulation. Forgiveness is a heart posture, not a requirement to stay in toxic situations. You can forgive someone and still set boundaries. You can forgive someone and still remove yourself from their influence. You can forgive someone and still protect yourself from repeated harm. Forgiveness releases them from your judgment. It doesn't obligate you to their proximity. But what forgiveness does do is this. It keeps your heart free. It keeps you from becoming the very thing that hurt you. It keeps bitterness from building a fortress around your soul. Because here's what happens when you refuse to forgive. You think you're punishing them, but you're actually imprisoning yourself. You think you're holding them accountable, but you're actually chaining yourself to the past. Every time you rehearse the offense, every time you replay the hurt, every time you remind yourself of what they did, you're giving them free rent in your mind. Unforgiveness is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. And here's what breaks my heart. You're not punishing them. They've moved on. They're sleeping peacefully at night, while you're up rehearsing conversations that will never happen. They're living their life while you're stuck in a moment that's long gone. The person who wronged you might not even remember what they did, but you've built a monument to it in your heart. Forgiveness isn't about them. It never was. It's about you reclaiming your freedom. It's about you refusing to give your past power over your future. It's about you deciding that what's ahead of you is more important than what's behind you. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, but Dr. Munroe, they don't deserve my forgiveness. And you're absolutely right. They probably don't. But here's the question you need to ask. You deserve to be free? Because that's what this is really about. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give to them. It's a gift you give to yourself. Think about it this way. When you refuse to forgive, you're volunteering to be a prisoner. Nobody put you in that cell but you. Nobody's holding the door closed but you. And the beautiful, liberating truth is this. You have the key. You've always had the key. Forgiveness is you finally decide. But let me be clear, forgiveness doesn't mean what they did was okay. It doesn't mean you excuse it, justify it, or minimize it. It doesn't mean you have to trust them again, or even have a relationship with them. Forgiveness simply means you're releasing them from the debt they owe you. You're saying, I'm no longer going to allow what you did to control who I'm becoming. Some of the most powerful people I've ever met are people who forgive. They looked at betrayal, abuse, abandonment, and injustice. And they made a decision, I refuse to let this define me. I refuse to let this limit me. I refuse to carry this one more day. And when they released it, they didn't just survive, they soared. Because forgiveness doesn't make you weak. It makes you unstoppable. It takes the weight off your wings. Chill, today I'm asking you, who do you need to forgive? What offense are you still carrying? What pain are you still rehearsing? Release it. Let it go. Not because they deserve it, but because you do. Because forgiveness is not about them anymore. It's about your freedom. It's about your future. It's about your future. It's about refusing to let yesterday's wounds dictate tomorrow's possibilities. And here's what I've learned through decades of counseling, teaching, and living. The moment you truly forgive is the moment you reclaim your power. Not the power to hurt back. That's weakness disguised as strength. But the power to choose. The power to define your own narrative. The power to say, what you did was wrong, and I'm moving forward anyway. You see, unforgiveness is a prison where you are both the inmate and the guard. You hold the keys, but you've convinced yourself that keeping the cell locked somehow punishes the one who hurt you. It doesn't. They've moved on. They're sleeping at night. They're living their lives. The only person imprisoned by your unforgiveness is you. Let me share something profound with you. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. Let me say that again, because this is where so many people get stuck. Forgiveness does not require reconciliation. You can forgive someone and never have a relationship with them again. You can release them and still maintain boundaries. You can let go of the poison without opening the door to more harm. Forgiveness is an internal release. Reconciliation is an external relationship. They are not the same thing. You can have one without the other. And sometimes wisdom demands that you do. I've watched people torture themselves thinking, if I forgive them, I have to let them back into my life. No, you don't. Forgiveness says, I release you from the debt you owe me. Wisdom says, but I've also learned something about your character. and I'm choosing not to give you access to hurt me again. That's not vindictiveness. That's discernment. That's emotional intelligence. That's protecting the treasure of your future from those who have proven they cannot be trusted with it. You can pray for someone from a distance. You can wish them well without welcoming them close. You can release bitterness without restoring relationship. This is the nuance that religious teaching often misses. And it's left countless people feeling guilty for having healthy boundaries. So as you stand here today, wrestling with wounds that still feel fresh, I want you to understand your healing doesn't require their apology. Your peace doesn't depend on their acknowledgement. Your freedom doesn't wait on their change.